We are headed here into 2017, 2018. So I brought on the line Charles Nenner, founder and head of research of Charles Nenner Research. And his website is charlesnenner.com. And this is a man who's greatly respected across the financial world, and he has roots deep into the financial industry and is now providing independent research and doing so for years for people to follow and learn and gather information and make informed decisions on. He's been featured on news outlets across the board, major mainstream news outlets, and it's a privilege for me to talk to him today. Charles, thanks for coming on the line with me.
You're welcome.
Sir, you've made some pretty significant claims and have said that the stock market is in for a big crash with equities, and you've pointed to around now, 2017, 2018, as the time that it will all culminate. And so I'd love for you to give us some details and some background on this information.
Well, as you know, or you maybe don't know, I was building neural networks years and years ago based on the fact that I don't believe that there's free choice in financial markets. And I came with that to Goldman Sachs. It has been used for the prop traders at Goldman Sachs and the hedge funds for many years. And when I left Goldman Sachs, I started my own firm. So the whole assumption is based on the fact that you can predict what's going to happen time-wise and price-wise. So a market goes up, so the system tells you until which day it goes up and how high it goes up. The price depends on the momentum. Something takes off with a certain momentum. And it's not important what kind of news comes out half a year later or a year later. From the start of that momentum, you can calculate like a bullet you shoot in the air, how high it's going or how low it's going. And there are cycles. That means it's from top to top, from bottom to bottom. You can find how many weeks, how many months, how many years are between tops. And that's how you calculate when the next top is coming. So for a couple of years, I've been saying the next top is coming, major top, in September 2017. And the calculation was that Dow Jones will go down to 5,000, but that will take 4 years. So the bottom will be in between the year 20 and 21.
Wow. And has any of this information changed over time? I mean, you've been saying this now for a few years and predicting that we're coming to this head here, which is now around the corner. But has any of it changed given the circumstances of the president, what's going on geopolitically? I know you said that you avoid the news, but any thoughts on that?
Well, the assumption is that longer term, the short term events of who's the president or interest rates don't change anything longer term. So the cycles never change. It's not dynamic. It's just static. It stays the same. And it doesn't really matter on the short term if something changes or doesn't change. If you look at what I call the super cycle that started 250 years ago, this is the end of the super cycle, which you can feel because even lower interest rates don't really get the economy going anymore. The liquidity is a problem, and that whoever was in charge would not have changed the outcome that started 250 years ago.
Charles, and when it comes to some of these fundamentals, we have now over 100 million people not working here in the U.S. and completely outside of the labor force or statistically unemployed if you put those numbers together. And I wonder, what is everything going to look like if the Dow Jones goes to 5,000, considering things are not that great even as they stand today?
Well, it's going to be terrible. They used to have depressions, what we call depressions, and then the Fed decided we don't want to have depressions anymore, and then Nixon says, let's go away from the gold standard, and then the Fed could do whatever they wanted. The result was there were no real depressions, but there were only small recessions. And you can keep the economy going only for, as long as it's possible. And I feel that Greenspan saw it coming, and he tried to postpone it. He says, not in my lifetime. I don't want to ruin my name. And then Bernanke kept it going, and it's just coming to an end because they didn't want to have the ups and downs in the economy like it's normal. So if you keep it going till the end, then the down move is going to be much bigger than you would have had otherwise.
Well, Janet Yellen is now talking about raising interest rates, putting the screws down on the economy, essentially, by doing so. And you know what? It's interesting because we've had unprecedented stimulus over the past 8 years, doubling the national debt and purchasing bonds. I mean, something that would have been unthinkable in different places around the world. We've even seen negative interest rates. And now the Fed's talking about raising interest rates. And do you see this as them just running out of options and having to give in to the inevitable of raising interest rates? And could they potentially stimulate elsewhere, like overtly purchasing stocks in the stock market, or maybe coming into the real estate market and doing other things that sidestep the interest rate manipulation?
Well, I'm going to say something that you might think is too far stretched. I think my models are better than the ones of the Federal Reserve. And what the Federal Reserve is seeing now is that inflation could go in direction of 2%, which is the target to do something with interest rates. Only my system shows that after the 2%, we're going back into deflation. So they might screw up over here based on their models that show that we go see an inflation of 2% also in Europe. Now, if you talk about measures to keep the stock market going, my system is based on the fact that everything is correct until proven otherwise. Now, what you have here, I think, by now the longest expansion ever in the stock market. You have a business cycle that is already stretched. If you look at the business cycle every time, you know how many years it is. And to say this time it's going to be different because we're going to interfere, that's the mistake that everybody always makes. So my system is based on it's not going to be different this time, which for 100% worked since I'm in this business since the mid-'80s. And I remember that new people came to Goldman Sachs and I was giving classes. And they says, what if this happens? What if that happens? I says, listen, guys, you don't know what's going to happen. If this is how it works, then we don't need you. We can get the mailman, ask him what's going to happen. We take you on and we give you a big salary and bonus based on the fact that you know the history of financial markets and can project it in the future. And if that doesn't work, according to you guys, we don't need you. Oh, then they change their mind. So, or we think that based on the knowledge we have, we know what's going to happen in the future. Or we say anytime, any second, something new can happen, and then you cannot forecast anything. So I stay with the fact that this is such a long expansion for the last couple of 100 years in a stock market, in a financial market. I stay with the fact that the business cycle is coming to an end. And it seems very unlikely that anybody can stop something that is in force for hundreds of years.
Well, we are now in the middle of just a massive political revolution. And it does seem like here in France, Marine Le Pen might be riding on the coattails of what we saw in the UK with Brexit, and then with the Trump win, with these outsiders coming in and, shaking things up. And I know people disagree on how much Donald Trump is doing that or, everything that's been going on. But what is clear is that the populist movement is on the rise. And I want to get your thoughts. Is this significant to you in any way as a whole as to, where society is going and what to expect?
Well, there's a big cycle in social unrest of 60 years. So we're at the mid-60s, the Vietnam situation and everything that came with it. And now we're going back into social unrest again. But what's more important is that I also do for different countries the war cycles. And if you look at war cycles, always in the second decade of a new century, a major war starts. Now, in between you also have cycles, but if you want to take a look and it would start now and it's starting, the war's everywhere, you probably will say there's no big war. Well, that's how it goes in stock market. This stock goes down, that stock goes down, but the index is still holding up until the whole thing collapses. So if you go back 100 years ago, it was around 1914 that you had the First World War extending into the Second World War. If you go 100 years before that, it was 1814, you had Napoleon. If you go 100 years before, you had the Habsburg Wars. And if you want to take a look and you Google major war around 600, 700, 800, whatever you want, it's always starting in the second decade of the new century. That's very interesting by itself, but since it happened, since the year zero, I have to assume that we're getting in more trouble and a big war is coming. That I've been saying also for 4 or 5 years, just based on the cycle. Now, to say that depends on who's president of the United States is very short-sighted, because the cycle always works, never mind. So how that works in mass psychology is a different story. But there's really nothing that's based on a certain leader. Now, what you say about Le Pen, it's not that Le Pen and Trump and also in Holland and Germany that these people are changing the opinion of the people. It's the other way around. If you look what happened in the United States, we had Carter, and whatever Carter did went wrong. Even when he tried to get the hostages out of Persia, the helicopters collided. And then Reagan came, and suddenly everything looked great. Well, did Reagan do it? No. The atmosphere has changed, and that's why people voted for somebody like Reagan. So Le Pen and Trump are the end result of a change in psychology among the people.
Charles, and then what do you suppose a world war will look like in 2017, 2018? I mean, I hear Einstein, the famous quote he said, I don't know when the next world war will be or something along those lines, but it will be fought with sticks and stones, or that the next world war, which I guess we're on the verge of, is going to be nuclear, and it's going to be so bad that the war that's fought after is going to bring us back into the Stone Ages, basically. What do you foresee in terms of where we are and the technologies that we have, and what a massive war will potentially look like?
Well, I've been saying this a couple of years ago because I saw that the aerospace indices in Japan and Vietnam and China went through the roof, so something is building up over there. Of course, I'm not an expert. What I can do is the cycle and price. Now, the cycles show me, and if you look it up, there's 100-year cycles. Only one of the cycles. That's always the middle of the decade in the new century, the first decade. But price-wise, it's not nice to say, but price-wise, vertically, you can put out the number of people dying. And of course, in every war, the people that die is a bigger number than the war before. So the only thing I can say is it's probably much bigger than the war before. I understand that it's not my research that all over the Second World War in Japan, Russia, Germany, whatever, 170, 180 million people died. But also this is a small detail because at the same time, the population of the world went from 2 million to 6 million. So in the long term, will it change something? No, it will not change something. Like the Second World War didn't change anything on the long term, but it's going to have a lot of casualties.
Well, sir, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. If you want to give anyone some advice and just general advice on these massive implications that you're calling for, I mean, specifically with their finances, what's some general advice you would offer? And, please let them know what they will find when they visit your work.
Well, first of all, we at the high of the bond market, I said, people understand you need some rate of return, but you should get totally out of bonds because, the bull market of 30 years is over. And the brokers that say every dip is going to come back is because they've been broker for 30 years, and they only know that the bond market goes up. Now, there's a very clear cycle of 60 years. You can also call it Kondratyev cycle that shows you where the bonds are going. So if you take that high and you go back every time 30 years, you go from top to high, from top to high. Don't let people tell you this time is different. So the people who are in bond funds, and that's the problem, you don't even get back to principal, they're almost down 20%. Now, what I can advise you is, by the way, if you go to take our research, we give it to you for free for a while, so that would help you timing the market. But I wouldn't wait till September. I would try to be very, very covered or be totally out of the market by July this year. What are you going to do with your money? Well, it's a problem. What all my big clients, I mean the institutions and hedge funds are doing a lot is they buy, and not everybody can do that, they buy small apartments and they rent them out because they also don't trust the financial system. And they know that the real estate is going down again, but in the meantime, they have income, and after 4 or 5 years, the real estate will go up. Now, how do I know that a lot of big institutions don't trust the financial market? Because for a while, interest rates on the 10-year were negative in Holland. I watch a lot Holland because I'm from Amsterdam. And still big institutions are buying the bonds because they're afraid of the financial institutions. So they were prepared to take a negative return for 10 years in order to be safeguarded by the Dutch government. So there's a lot going on which the media don't tell you. And if you follow our research, which again you will get for free for a longer period to check it out, it will be very helpful. And the situation is not to try to generate income, just try to save your money and be very careful.
Well, massive implications there and great advice. Charles Nenner, thanks for coming on the show with me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm sorry it sounds a bit negative, but that's what we're going to see. No,
you're right. And, I appreciate your honesty and giving it to us straight. I hope to follow up with you here maybe in a few months, especially around September, given the circumstances that we're anticipating.
Correct. Okay, we'll do that.